The scorching sun beat down on Zara Montgomery's porcelain skin as she stood trembling on the makeshift auction block in Willow Creek, Arizona Territory, 1875. Her wrists bound with coarse rope, her spirit barely intact after the 2-week journey that had brought her west under false promises of respectable employment. Now, the truth was laid bare before her. She was being sold to the highest bidder like cattle at a market. $500 for this fine specimen of womanhood, the auctioneer bellowed, his voice carrying across the dusty town square where a crowd of men had gathered, their eyes hungry as they assessed her worth. Look at that golden hair, those blue eyes. She can cook, clean, and provide all manner of companionship to a lonely frontier man. Zara's chest tightened with panic. At 22, she had left behind everything in Boston following her parents' deaths, desperate for a new beginning after the family fortune had been lost to her father's gambling debts. The advertisement had promised a position as a governess for a wealthy cattle baron. Instead, she had been drugged, transported across the country, and now stood before strangers who saw her as property. $550, called out a portly man with yellowed teeth and filthy hands. $600, countered another, his face pockmarked and cruel. Tears welled in Zara's eyes as the bidding continued. She scanned the crowd desperately, hoping for mercy from anyone. That's when she saw him standing at the back of the crowd, his tall frame leaning against a hitching post, arms crossed over his broad chest. Unlike the others, he wasn't leering at her. His deep-set eyes beneath the brim of his worn leather hat studied her with what seemed like genuine concern. $800, shouted a red-faced man with an elaborate mustache whom Zara recognized as the owner of the local saloon. $1,000, countered a gruff voice from an older man in expensive attire, clearly one of the wealthy ranchers from the area. The auctioneer's face lit up with greed. $1,000. Do I hear any more bids for this fine? She's not for sale. The voice cut through the crowd like a knife, deep and commanding. The crowd parted as the tall stranger from the back strode forward. His spurs jangled with each determined step, his weathered duster coat billowing slightly in the hot breeze. "York Blackwood," someone in the crowd muttered, a note of apprehension in their voice. The auctioneer's smile faltered. "Now see here, Blackwood. This is a legitimate business transaction." "There's nothing legitimate about selling a woman," York countered, now standing directly before the auction block. His eyes locked with Zara's, and she saw something in them that made her heart skip compassion, perhaps, or determination. "She belongs with me." "You'll have to bid like everyone else," the auctioneer insisted, nervously adjusting his collar. York's hand moved to rest on the pistol at his hip. "I'm not bidding. This ends now." A tense silence fell over the crowd. "The lady is coming with me," York continued, his voice calm but brooking no argument. "And if anyone has a problem with that, we can settle it right here." The saloon owner stepped forward. "Now wait just a minute, Blackwood." "I've already bid $800. York silenced him with a look. "Harold, you've got enough girls working in that establishment of yours. This one's not joining them." $1,500, called the wealthy rancher, stepping forward with a smug smile. "That's my final offer, and I doubt even the famous York Blackwood can match it." York's jaw tightened. He turned to face the rancher, Bartholomew Preston, one of the most powerful men in the territory. "Preston, you've got a wife waiting at home. What would she think of this little purchase?" Preston's face reddened with anger. "How I conduct my affairs is none of your concern, Blackwood. When it involves forcing an innocent woman into servitude, it becomes my concern." York turned back to the auctioneer. "This auction is illegal in the Arizona Territory, and you know it." Unless you want me riding to Fort Huachuca to inform the army about your operation, I suggest you release her immediately." The auctioneer's face paled. Slavery had been abolished a decade ago after the Civil War, and while the frontier often operated by its own rules, the army took a dim view of human trafficking. He looked to Preston for support, but even the wealthy rancher seemed unwilling to risk legal troubles. "Fine," the auctioneer finally spat. "Take her and be damned." York climbed the steps to the auction block in 2 long strides. Up close, Zara could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the faint scar that ran along his jawline, and the gentleness in his hands as he untied her bonds. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly. Zara nodded, finding her voice at last. "Yes, thank you." He offered his arm for support, and she took it, feeling the solid strength of him as he led her down from the platform. The crowd parted before them, some men looking disappointed, others relieved that the tense standoff had ended without bloodshed. "My horse is over there," York said, nodding toward a magnificent black stallion tethered nearby. "We should leave town before anyone gets any ideas about following us." "Where are we going?" Zara asked, suddenly aware that she was placing her trust in a complete stranger. "Somewhere safe," he replied. "My ranch is about 10 miles outside of town. You can rest there, figure out your next steps." As they reached his horse, Preston's voice called out behind them. "This isn't over, Blackwood. No one crosses me in my own town." York turned, placing himself between Zara and the angry rancher. "It was over the moment you thought you could buy a human being, Preston. Go home to your wife." He helped Zara mount the horse before swinging up behind her. She stiffened slightly at the proximity, but there was nothing improper in the way he held himself, maintaining as much distance as the saddle would allow. "Hold on," he instructed, and she gripped the saddle horn as he urged the horse forward. They rode in silence through the town, past curious onlookers and out into the open country beyond. Only when the buildings of Willow Creek had faded from view did Zara feel the tension begin to leave her body. The vastness of the landscape spread out before them, rugged mountains in the distance, rolling hills covered with scrub and cacti, and a sky so wide and blue it seemed impossible. "I don't know how to thank you," she finally said, raising her voice slightly to be heard over the rhythmic hoofbeats. "No need for thanks," York replied. "What happened back there wasn't right. May I ask why you helped me? You don't know me." There was a pause before he answered. "I've seen what happens to women sold like that. No one deserves such a fate." Something in his voice suggested personal experience, but Zara didn't press. Instead, she asked, "Are you really taking me to your ranch?" "Yes. I've got a spare room. My housekeeper, Mrs. Flores, will help get you settled. After you've rested, we can figure out what you want to do next." "I have nowhere to go," Zara admitted, the reality of her situation crashing down on her. "I spent everything I had on the journey west." "Then you'll stay until you decide otherwise," York said simply. "I've got plenty of space." They crested a hill, and Zara gasped at the view that opened before them. A broad valley stretched out, cut through by a winding creek lined with cottonwood trees. Nestled in the center was a sprawling ranch house surrounded by several outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and pastures where cattle grazed in the distance. "That's Blackwood Ranch," York said with unmistakable pride in his voice. "It's not fancy, but it's home. Not fancy." To Zara's eyes, it looked like paradise compared to the nightmare she'd just escaped. As they descended into the valley, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months' hope. The ranch house grew larger as they approached, and Zara could see it was built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and flower boxes hung from the windows. adding unexpected touches of color to the rustic structure. A middle-aged woman with silver-streaked black hair emerged from the house as they rode into the yard, wiping her hands on her apron. Behind her, a young man hurried out to take the reins as York dismounted. "Diego, see to midnight," York instructed as he reached up to help Zara down from the horse. Her legs felt unsteady after the long ride, and she was grateful for his supportive hand at her elbow. "Senor York, you bring a guest?" the woman asked, her dark eyes taking in Zara's disheveled appearance with concern. "Mrs. Flores, this is Miss—" York paused, realizing he didn't know her name. "Zara Montgomery," she supplied, attempting to smooth her wrinkled dress. "Miss Montgomery needs our help," York explained. "She'll be staying with us for a while." Mrs. Flores's expression softened immediately. "Of course. Come inside, Nina. You look like you could use a hot meal and a bath." Zara nearly wept at the kindness in the woman's voice. After weeks of harsh treatment, such simple humanity felt overwhelming. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. "I need to check on something in the barn," York said. "Mrs. Flores will take good care of you." As he strode away, Zara followed the housekeeper into the ranch house. The interior was surprisingly comfortable, with polished wooden floors, sturdy furniture, and colorful woven rugs. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, and bookshelves lined another, evidence that the ranch's owner was more than just a rough cowboy. "The bathroom is through there," Mrs. Flores said, pointing to a door. "I will prepare hot water for your bath and find you some clean clothes." "You're very kind," Zara said, "but I don't want to impose." Mrs. Flores waved away her concern. "It is no imposition. Senor York brought you here for a reason. He does not do such things lightly." "How long have you worked for Mr. Blackwood?" Zara asked, curious about the man who had rescued her. "5 years now, since my husband passed. Senor York gave me and my son Diego a home when we had nowhere else to go." She smiled warmly. "He is a good man with a good heart, though he tries to hide it sometimes." While Mrs. Flores busied herself preparing the bath, Zara wandered to the window and looked out at the ranch. She could see York in the distance, speaking with several cowboys near the corral. Even from afar, there was something compelling about him, a natural authority that the other men clearly respected. Later, after the most wonderful bath Zara could remember having, she sat at the kitchen table wrapped in a borrowed dress that Mrs. Flores had altered hastily to fit her smaller frame. The hot stew before her was simple but delicious, and she ate hungrily, realizing she couldn't remember her last proper meal. The door opened and York entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. He'd cleaned up as well, his dark hair still damp from washing, his face freshly shaved. Without the trail dust, Zara could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so, and strikingly handsome in a rugged way. "Feeling better?" he asked, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "Much, thank you," Zara replied. "Your hospitality is overwhelming." He shrugged off the gratitude as he took a seat across from her. "It's nothing. Anyone would have done the same." "But they didn't," she pointed out quietly. "You did." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of one. Mrs. Flores placed a bowl of stew in front of York, breaking the moment. "Eat, senor. You've had a long day." As they ate, York asked gentle questions about how Zara had ended up at the auction. She told him about her parents' deaths, the discovery of her father's debts, and the advertisement that had promised respectable employment in Arizona. "I was desperate," she admitted. "When Mr. Jenkins, the man who placed the advertisement, offered to pay for my journey west, it seemed like Providence. It wasn't until we reached St. Louis that I realized something was wrong. He drugged my tea one night. When I woke up, We were on a different train heading south, and my hands were bound. York's expression darkened. Jenkins is part of a network that brings women west under false pretenses. The law has been after him for years, but he's slippery. You seem to know a lot about it, Zara observed. A shadow crossed his face. My sister was taken by men like that 8 years ago. I tracked her for months, but... He didn't finish the sentence. I'm so sorry, Zara said softly, understanding now why he had intervened so forcefully at the auction. He nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy without dwelling on it. Ever since then, I've made it my business to interfere with their operations whenever I can. Preston and his friends don't appreciate it, but they know better than to push too hard. Won't you face consequences for what you did today? Zara asked, concerned. Preston's influential, but he's not all-powerful, and he knows I have friends in the territorial government. York's mouth quirked in a half-smile. Besides, I'm pretty handy with this. He patted the pistol at his hip. After dinner, Mrs. Flores showed Zara to a comfortable bedroom on the second floor. The room was simply furnished but clean, with a large bed covered in a colorful quilt, a dresser, and a small writing desk by the window that overlooked the valley. Rest well, Señorita, Mrs. Flores said kindly. You are safe here. Alone at last, Zara sank onto the bed, overcome by the day's events. For the first time since her parents' deaths, she felt truly safe. As exhaustion claimed her, her last thoughts were of York Blackwood's eyes that had looked at her and seen a person, not property. The morning light streamed through the curtains, waking Zara from the deepest sleep she'd had in weeks. For a moment, she was disoriented, then the events of the previous day came flooding back. She was at Blackwood Ranch, rescued from an unthinkable fate by a stranger with kind eyes and a determined spirit. She dressed in the clothes Mrs. Flores had left for her, a simple blouse and skirt that fit reasonably well, and made her way downstairs. The house was quiet, but she could smell coffee brewing in the kitchen. Mrs. Flores was kneading dough at a large wooden table, flour dusting her forearms. Buenos dias, Señorita. Did you sleep well? Better than I have in months, Zara admitted. Is Mr. Blackwood awake? Senor York rises before the sun. He is checking the north pasture with the men. She nodded toward a coffee pot on the stove. Help yourself. Breakfast will be ready soon. Zara poured herself a cup of the strong coffee and ventured out onto the porch. The morning was glorious, the air crisp and clear, carrying the scent of sage and pine from the surrounding hills. From this vantage point, she could see much of the ranch, the barns and corrals, the bunkhouse where the ranch hands stayed, and beyond them, the vast pastures where cattle grazed. Movement caught her eye, and she spotted a group of riders returning from the north. Even at a distance, she recognized York's tall figure leading the group. Something about the way he sat a horse straight-backed and confident made him unmistakable. As the riders approached the ranch house, York spotted her on the porch and raised a hand in greeting. He said something to the men with him, who continued toward the bunkhouse while he rode to the main house. "Good morning," he called as he dismounted. "Sleep well?" "Very well, thank you," Zara replied, suddenly aware of how informal the situation was, her standing on his porch in borrowed clothes, her hair loose around her shoulders. If York noticed any impropriety, he didn't show it. He hitched his horse to the rail and climbed the porch steps, removing his hat as he joined her. "Mrs. Flores taking good care of you?" he asked, accepting the cup of coffee she offered from the pot she'd brought outside. "She's been wonderful. Everyone has been so kind." Zara hesitated, then added, "I don't want to impose on your hospitality, Mr. Blackwood. I should make plans to move on." "York," he corrected, "and there's no rush. You're welcome to stay as long as you need to get back on your feet." "That's very generous, but "Do you have somewhere else to go?" he asked directly. Zara fell silent. The truth was, she had nowhere. Her parents' home in Boston had been sold to pay their debts. Her few relatives were distant both in relationship and geography. She had no prospects, no money, and no connections in this harsh territory. "I thought as much," York said, his voice gentle rather than judgmental. "Stay, at least until you figure out your next steps." Before Zara could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 3 riders were coming up the long drive to the ranch, and York's expression hardened as he recognized them. "Go inside," he said quietly. "Tell Mrs. Flores that Preston is here. The man from the auction, the one who bid on me." Zara felt a chill despite the warm morning. "Yes." "Please, go inside." The urgency in his voice convinced her. As she retreated into the house, she heard the riders reaching the yard, their horses' hooves loud on the packed earth. Through the window, she watched as York descended the porch steps to meet the visitors. The man in the lead was unmistakably Bartholomew Preston, the wealthy rancher who had bid $1,000 for her. He was expensively dressed even for a morning ride, his gray hair and beard neatly trimmed, his bearing aristocratic. The 2 men flanking him were clearly hired guns, their hands resting casually near their holstered pistols. "Blackwood," Preston's voice carried clearly through the open window. "I've come to discuss yesterday's unfortunate misunderstanding." "There was no misunderstanding," York replied, his stance relaxed but alert. "The woman is under my protection now." Preston's face tightened with anger. "You embarrass me in front of half the town. That's not something I can overlook." "You embarrassed yourself by participating in an illegal auction," York countered. "Go home, Preston. There's nothing for you here." "I'm willing to pay you double what I bid yesterday," Preston said, his voice dropping to a more reasonable tone. $2,000 is a fair price for the girl." Zara's stomach turned at the casual way he discussed purchasing her. "She's not for sale." York's voice was steel. "Not at any price." Preston's facade of civility slipped. "You're making a mistake, Blackwood. I can make things very difficult for you. The territorial legislature listens to men like me, not rough-edged cowboys with delusions of nobility." "Are you threatening me?" York asked, his hand now resting on his pistol. The 2 men with Preston tensed, their hands inching closer to their own weapons. "I'm offering you a chance to be reasonable," Preston replied. "Sell me the girl or face the consequences." "The consequences of what?" "Preventing a kidnapping, stopping an illegal auction." York shook his head. "You have no ground to stand on, Preston, and you know it. Now get off my property before I forget my manners." For a tense moment, Zara thought violence would erupt in the yard. The 2 gunmen looked eager for an excuse, and Preston's face was mottled with rage. But something in York's steady gaze must have given them pause. "This isn't over," Preston finally said, turning his horse. "Not by a long shot." "It is from where I'm standing," York replied evenly. Preston and his men rode away, dust billowing behind them. Only when they had disappeared down the drive did York's shoulders relax slightly. He turned toward the house, his eyes finding Zara at the window. Their gazes locked, and she saw concern there not for himself, but for her. She moved to the door and stepped out onto the porch as he climbed the steps. "I'm sorry you had to witness that," he said. "I'm the one who should apologize," Zara replied. "I've brought trouble to your doorstep." York shook his head. "Preston and I have been at odds for years. This is just the latest chapter in an old story." "What will he do?" Zara couldn't keep the worry from her voice. "Nothing he can make stick," York assured her, "but he might try to make things difficult for a while." "Are you having second thoughts about staying?" "No," Zara said, surprising herself with the firmness of her answer. "I'm not afraid, not when I'm here." Something flickered in York's eyes at her words, something warm that made Zara's heart beat a little faster. But he only nodded, putting his hat back on. Good. Now, how about some breakfast? I'm starving after the morning ride. Over the next few days, Zara settled into life at Blackwood Ranch. Mrs. Flores took her under her wing, teaching her the routines of the household and including her in daily tasks. Zara, eager to earn her keep, threw herself into learning everything from baking bread to preserving fruits from the small orchard behind the house. She saw little of York during daylight hours. He left early each morning to work with his men, returning at dusk tired but satisfied with the day's accomplishments. But their evenings often found them sharing quiet conversations on the porch or by the fire, getting to know each other in small, meaningful increments. She learned that he had come west at 18, working as a cowhand, before saving enough to buy a small parcel of land. Through hard work and smart decisions, he had expanded that initial purchase into the substantial ranch it was today. He spoke little of his past before coming west, though he mentioned growing up in Missouri with his parents and sister. In turn, Zara told him about her life in Boston, her father's work as a banker, and her mother's involvement in social causes. She described the shock of discovering, after their deaths in a carriage accident, that her father had gambled away most of their fortune, leaving her nearly destitute. "I was naive," she admitted one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of orange and gold. "I believed Mr. Jenkins because I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe that someone was offering me a legitimate chance." "That doesn't make what happened your fault," York said firmly. "Jenkins and men like him prey on vulnerable people. They're skilled at appearing trustworthy. Still, I should have been more careful." "We all make mistakes," York said, his voice softening. "The important thing is what you do afterward." There was something in his tone that suggested he was speaking from personal experience, but before Zara could ask, Diego, Mrs. Flores's son, came hurrying up to the porch. "Senor York," he called, clearly agitated. "Riders coming fast from town." York was on his feet instantly, hand moving to his pistol. "How many?" "5, maybe 6. They're still far off but riding hard." York turned to Zara. "Go inside, stay with Mrs. Flores." "Is it Preston?" she asked, rising from her chair. "I don't know, but I'm not taking chances." His expression was grim. "Please, Zara, inside." She nodded and hurried into the house, finding Mrs. Flores in the kitchen, her face lined with worry. "What is happening?" the housekeeper asked. "Riders coming from town," Zara explained. "York thinks it might be trouble, Mrs. Flores crossed herself quickly. "That Preston is a devil. He does not forget a slight." From the kitchen window, they watched as York gathered several ranch hands who had emerged from the bunkhouse at Diego's warning. They positioned themselves around the yard, rifles ready but not yet aimed. The riders appeared at the end of the drive, slowing as they approached the house. In the fading light, Zara couldn't make out their faces, but she could see they were heavily armed. "That's not Preston," Mrs. Flores said, peering through the window. "That's Sheriff Turner and his deputies." The group of lawmen reined in their horses in front of the main house. The man in the lead, presumably Sheriff Turner, dismounted and approached York, who had stepped forward to meet him. Though they couldn't hear the conversation from inside, the body language was clear enough. The sheriff was tense, his hand resting on his pistol as he spoke. York stood his ground, shaking his head emphatically at whatever the sheriff was saying. After several minutes, the sheriff gestured toward the house. York's posture stiffened, but after a moment's hesitation, he nodded and turned toward the ranch house. "He's coming inside," Zara said, stepping back from the window. "With the sheriff." Mrs. Flores touched Zara's arm reassuringly. "Do not worry, Nina. Senor York will handle this." The front door opened, and York entered with Sheriff Turner, a weathered man in his 50s with a thick mustache and shrewd eyes. Those eyes fixed on Zara immediately. "Miss Montgomery?" the sheriff asked, removing his hat. "Yes," Zara confirmed, her mouth suddenly dry. "I'm Sheriff James Turner from Willow Creek. I need to ask you some questions about recent events." York moved to stand beside Zara. "She doesn't have to answer anything without legal representation, Sheriff." "This isn't a formal interrogation, Blackwood," Turner said with a touch of exasperation. "I'm trying to sort out a mess, and the young lady's version of events would be helpful." "What mess, exactly?" Zara asked. The sheriff sighed. "Bartholomew Preston has filed charges against York here for kidnapping and theft of property, meaning you, miss. He claims he legally purchased your contract as a domestic servant and that Blackwood took you by force." "That's absurd," Zara exclaimed. "I was drugged and brought west against my will. I never signed any contract. They were auctioning me off like livestock." "That's what I figured," Turner said, nodding. "But Preston has influence and he's determined to make trouble. You're not going to arrest York, are you?" Zara asked, alarmed at the thought. "Not today." The sheriff glanced at York. "But this isn't going away easily. Preston's got the ear of Judge Wilson, and the judge has issued a summons for both of you to appear in court next Monday to sort this out." York accepted the official paper the sheriff held out. "We'll be there." "See that you are," Turner advised. "And Blackwood, watch your back. Preston's not the type to let the law handle his grudges if he can find another way." After the sheriff and his deputies had departed, Zara sank into a chair at the kitchen table, trembling slightly. "I'm so sorry," she said as York sat across from her. "This is all because of me." "No," York said firmly. "This is because Preston can't stand being denied something he wants. It's about his pride, not you. But if I hadn't come here, then you'd be at Preston's mercy right now," York interrupted. "And that's not something I can stomach thinking about." Mrs. Flores quietly placed cups of coffee before them and withdrew tactfully, leaving them alone in the kitchen. "What will happen at the court hearing?" Zara asked after a moment. "You'll tell your story, I'll tell mine. Preston will tell his lies." York took a sip of his coffee. "Judge Wilson is generally fair-minded despite Preston's influence. With any luck, he'll dismiss the case. And if he doesn't?" The possibility terrified her. "Then we'll figure something out," York promised. "I won't let Preston get his hands on you, Zara. That's a promise." The intensity in his voice made her look up, meeting his gaze across the table. What she saw there, determination, protectiveness, and something deeper, made her breath catch. For a suspended moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, connected by something neither had put into words. York broke the spell first, clearing his throat and standing. "It's been a long day. You should get some rest." "Yes," Zara agreed, though rest was the furthest thing from her mind. "Good night, York." "Good night, Zara." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Zara's thoughts were in turmoil. The danger Preston posed was real and frightening. But equally unsettling was the realization that in just a few short days, York Blackwood had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated, ways that went far beyond gratitude for his protection. The days leading up to the court hearing passed in a blur of tension and preparation. York rode into town twice to speak with a lawyer friend, returning with advice on how Zara should present her testimony. They practiced what she would say, York gently questioning her as Preston's lawyer might, helping her prepare for the ordeal. Through it all, Zara found herself growing closer to York. Their conversations extended beyond the upcoming hearing to deeper subjects: their hopes, their values, their view of the world. She discovered in him a thoughtfulness that belied his rugged exterior, A man who read philosophy by lamplight and treated everyone from his most experienced cowhand to Diego's young son with equal respect. And though neither spoke of it directly, something was changing between them. It was in the way his eyes followed her movements, in the way her heart quickened when their hands accidentally touched, in the lingering conversations that stretched into the night until Mrs. Flores tactfully reminded them of the late hour. The evening before they were to travel to town for the hearing, Zara found York on the porch, staring out at the gathering dusk. The setting sun cast his profile in bronze, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the slight furrow of concentration between his brows. "May I join you?" she asked softly. He turned, and his expression lightened at the sight of her. "Always." She settled into the chair beside his, drawing her shawl closer against the evening chill. For several minutes they sat in comfortable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky. "Are you worried about tomorrow?" she finally asked. "Not about the hearing itself," York replied. "Your story is the truth, and the truth has power." "But you're worried about something," he nodded slowly. "Preston is unpredictable when he's been crossed. I'm concerned about what he might do if the ruling goes against him. You think he might try something violent, it's possible. Which is why I've asked some of my men to accompany us tomorrow, just as a precaution." Zara shivered, and not from the cool evening air. "I never imagined bringing such danger into your life." York turned to her, his expression suddenly intense. "Zara, meeting you, helping you, it's not something I regret, not for a moment. Even with all this trouble, even with all this trouble." His voice softened. "These past days, having you here, it's changed things, changed me." Zara's heart beat faster at his words. "Changed how?" He seemed to struggle with how to express himself, a man more accustomed to action than declarations. "This ranch, everything I've built. For years it's been enough. But lately I've started to feel like something was missing." His eyes held hers. "Then you arrived, and suddenly I could see what that something was." "York," she whispered, hardly daring to believe what he seemed to be saying. He reached out, taking her hand in his. His palm was calloused from years of ranch work, but his touch was gentle. "I know it's too soon. We barely know each other. And tomorrow, after the hearing, if you want to leave, start fresh somewhere else, I'll understand. I'll help you get wherever you want to go." "And if I don't want to leave?" Zara asked, her voice barely audible. Hope flickered in his eyes. "Then you'd be welcome to stay, for as long as you want." In that moment, with the vast sky darkening above them and the soft sounds of the ranch settling for the night around them, Zara felt a certainty she hadn't expected. This place, this man, they represented something she hadn't dared hope for after all she'd lost. A home. A future. "I think I'd like that very much," she said softly. York's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual, then brilliant. His hand tightened on hers, and he leaned forward slightly, his intention clear in his eyes. Zara met him halfway, her heart thundering in her chest as their lips met in a kiss that was tentative at first, then deepened with shared emotion. When they finally drew apart, York rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we'll face it together." "Together," Zara agreed, finding strength in the word, in the promise it held. Neither of them noticed Mrs. Flores watching from the window, a satisfied smile on her face as she quietly withdrew, leaving them to their private moment under the emerging stars. Morning arrived with a clarity that seemed at odds with the tense purpose of the day. Zara dressed carefully in her best borrowed outfit, a navy blue skirt and white blouse that Mrs. Flores had altered to fit her perfectly. Her golden hair was pinned up in a modest style that emphasized her natural beauty, while conveying seriousness appropriate for a court appearance. Breakfast was a quiet affair, the usual morning conversation subdued by the weight of what lay ahead. Afterward, York helped Zara into the buggy he had prepared for their journey to town. 4 of his most trusted ranch hands, armed and alert, mounted up to accompany them. "Ready?" York asked as he settled beside her on the buggy's seat. Zara nodded, drawing strength from his solid presence beside her. "As ready as I'll ever be." The journey to Willow Creek took just over an hour, the landscape passing in a blur as Zara rehearsed her testimony in her mind. As they approached the outskirts of town, she felt her anxiety rising. This was the place where she had faced the most humiliating moment of her life, where she had been treated as property rather than a person. "It's different now," York said softly, sensing her distress. "You're not alone this time." His words calmed her, and she straightened her shoulders as they drove down the main street toward the courthouse. People turned to watch their passage, curiosity and speculation in their gazes. News of the hearing had clearly spread throughout the small community. The courthouse was a modest but dignified building at the center of town. As they approached, Zara spotted Bartholomew Preston and several well-dressed men, presumably his lawyers, standing on the steps. Preston's face darkened at the sight of them, his eyes narrowing with barely concealed hatred. York helped Zara down from the buggy, keeping her hand firmly in his as they approached the courthouse. His ranch hands formed a protective circle around them, their presence a clear message that any trouble would be met with immediate response. "Blackwood," Preston acknowledged coldly as they reached the steps. "Miss Montgomery." "Preston," York replied with a curt nod, guiding Zara past him into the building. The courtroom was already filling with spectators eager to witness the confrontation between 2 of the territory's most prominent men. York led Zara to a bench near the front, where a lean, scholarly-looking man in a well-worn suit awaited them. "Zara, this is Benjamin Howe, an old friend and the finest lawyer in the territory," York introduced. "Miss Montgomery, a pleasure to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances," Howe said, shaking her hand. "York has told me your story. If you simply tell the judge exactly what happened, I believe we'll prevail today." "Thank you for your help, Mr. Howe," Zara said gratefully. "Ben has known me since I first came to Arizona," York explained. "He helped me purchase my first parcel of land when I barely knew what a deed was." "And now he owns half the valley," Howe said with a proud smile. "You picked a good man to rescue you, Miss Montgomery." Before Zara could respond, a door at the front of the courtroom opened, and a court clerk called out, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Wilson." Everyone stood as the judge entered, a tall, austere man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. He took his seat at the bench and surveyed the packed courtroom with a look of mild irritation. "Be seated," he instructed. "Now, I understand we're here to resolve a dispute between Mr. Bartholomew Preston and Mr. York Blackwood regarding the status of Miss Zara Montgomery. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Preston's lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, stepped forward. "My client alleges that Mr. Blackwood unlawfully deprived him of property he had legally contracted to purchase." "And that property would be the young lady?" the judge asked, his tone suggesting he found the terminology distasteful. "Miss Montgomery had entered into an agreement to provide domestic services in exchange for her passage west," the lawyer continued smoothly. "My client was in the process of purchasing that contract when Mr. Blackwood interfered by force." Judge Wilson turned his attention to Benjamin Howe. "And your response, Mr. Howe?" "Your Honor, Miss Montgomery was brought west under false pretenses, drugged and forced into what amounted to a slave auction, an auction that is clearly illegal under both territorial and federal law," Howe stated firmly. "Mr. Blackwood intervened to prevent a crime, not to commit one. Serious allegations on both sides, the judge noted. I think we'd better hear directly from Miss Montgomery. Zara felt a moment of panic as all eyes in the courtroom turned to her. York squeezed her hand reassuringly before she rose and moved to the witness stand. After she was sworn in, Judge Wilson addressed her directly. Miss Montgomery, please tell the court, in your own words, how you came to be in Arizona Territory and the circumstances that led to this dispute. Taking a deep breath, Zara began her story. She described her parents' deaths, her financial difficulties, and the advertisement that had seemed to offer honorable employment. Her voice remained steady as she recounted how Mr. Jenkins had drugged her tea in St. Louis and how she had awakened to find herself bound and on a different train. When we arrived in Willow Creek, I was kept locked in a room above the saloon for 2 days, she continued. Then I was taken to the town square where Mr. Jenkins announced I was to be auctioned off to the highest bidder. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom at this, and Judge Wilson gavelled for silence. And Mr. Preston was among the bidders, he asked. Yes, Your Honor, he bid $1,000. And then what happened, Mr. Blackwood intervened. He said what was happening was illegal and that I should be released. Zara's eyes found York's in the crowd. He took me to his ranch, where I've been recovering ever since. Preston's lawyer rose to cross-examine her, attempting to suggest that she had willingly entered into a contract with Jenkins and was simply changing her story now. But Zara held firm, her clear, consistent testimony gradually turning the mood of the courtroom against Preston. When she was finally permitted to step down, Zara felt exhausted but relieved. She had told the truth, and from the expressions on many faces in the courtroom, they believed her. York testified next, describing how he had come upon the auction and recognized it for what it was: human trafficking disguised as a labor contract sale. His testimony was straightforward and compelling, his quiet dignity a stark contrast to Preston's obvious anger. After hearing from several more witnesses, including Sheriff Turner, who confirmed that similar auctions had been investigated as potential violations of anti-slavery laws, Judge Wilson called a brief recess to consider his ruling. York and Zara waited tensely in a small antechamber, Howe pacing before them. You both did well, the lawyer assured them. Wilson's a fair judge, not easily swayed by Preston's money or influence. What happens if we win? Zara asked. Will Preston simply accept the ruling? Howe and York exchanged glances. Legally, he'll have to, Howe said carefully. But as to whether he'll let the matter drop personally, that's another question entirely. When court resumed, Judge Wilson's expression was grave as he delivered his ruling. Having heard the testimony presented today, I find that Miss Montgomery was indeed brought to this territory under false pretenses and subjected to treatment that violates both the letter and spirit of our laws. Mr. Blackwood's intervention, far from being an act of theft, was in fact a righteous prevention of a grave injustice. Relief flooded through Zara, and she felt York's hand find hers beneath the table. Furthermore, the judge continued, I am ordering an investigation into the activities of the man identified as Jenkins and any associates involved in this reprehensible scheme. He fixed Preston with a stern look. Mr. Preston, while the court accepts that you may have believed you were participating in a legitimate business transaction, ignorance of the law is no excuse. You are formally warned that any further involvement in such activities will result in severe legal consequences. Preston's face contorted with barely controlled rage, but he said nothing as the judge's gavel fell, concluding the proceedings. As the courtroom began to empty, York, Zara, and Howe gathered their belongings, preparing to leave. Preston and his lawyers huddled in urgent conversation across the room, occasionally casting dark glances in their direction. "That went better than I dared hope," Howe admitted as they moved toward the exit. "Wilson all but accused Preston of slave trading in open court. We should get back to the ranch before Preston decides to express his displeasure more directly," York said, his hand protectively at Zara's elbow. They had just reached the courthouse steps when Preston's voice called out behind them, "Blackwood." York turned slowly, positioning himself slightly in front of Zara. "The matter's settled, Preston." The judge was clear. Preston approached until he stood just a few feet away, his face flushed with anger. "You think you've won? This isn't over, not by a long shot." "It is over," York replied evenly. "Go home to your wife. Forget about Miss Montgomery." "I don't forget insults," Preston hissed. "And I don't forgive them either. You've made an enemy today, Blackwood, one who won't rest until you've lost everything you care about." His gaze shifted to Zara, and the naked malice in his eyes made her shiver. "That's enough," York said, his voice hardening. "Make your threats if it makes you feel better, but remember this. Touch her or anyone else at my ranch, and it'll be the last mistake you ever make." The two men stared at each other for a long, tense moment before Preston finally stepped back. "We'll see," he said coldly, then turned and stalked away, his lawyers hurrying after him. The ride back to the ranch was subdued, everyone alert for any sign of trouble along the way. But they encountered no difficulties, and as the familiar buildings of Blackwood Ranch came into view, Zara felt herself relaxing for the first time since they'd left that morning. "Home," York said softly as they approached, and the words seemed to carry special significance now, a promise rather than just a description. Mrs. Flores greeted them anxiously at the door. "How did it go?" "You are safe. We won," York told her, helping Zara down from the buggy. "The judge ruled in our favor completely." "Gracias a Dios," Mrs. Flores said, crossing herself. "Come inside. I have prepared a special dinner to celebrate or to comfort, depending on the news." The meal was indeed special, a feast of roast beef, fresh vegetables from the kitchen garden, and a berry pie that Mrs. Flores had clearly labored over all day. Diego joined them, along with the ranch hands who had accompanied them to town, everyone relieved and cheerful at the outcome of the hearing. But as the evening progressed and the others drifted away to their own quarters, leaving York and Zara alone by the fire, a more somber mood settled between them. "Preston's threats," Zara said quietly. "Do you think he means them?" York stared into the flames for a long moment before answering. "Preston's a proud man with substantial resources and few scruples. Yes, I think he means them. Then I've put you and everyone here in danger by staying." "No." York's response was immediate and firm. "Preston and I have been on a collision course for years. This just hastened the inevitable." "Still, perhaps it would be safer for everyone if I left," Zara suggested, though the thought of leaving Blackwood Ranch, leaving York, created a physical ache in her chest. York turned to her, his expression troubled. "Is that what you want?" "No," she admitted softly. "But I don't want to be the cause of more trouble for you, Zara." He moved closer, taking both her hands in his. "Last night when I said I wanted you to stay, I meant it, not out of obligation or protection, but because these past days with you have shown me what's been missing in my life." "And what's that?" she asked, hardly daring to breathe. "Someone to share it with," he answered simply. "Someone who sees the world the way I do, who values what I value, who makes this house feel like more than just a place to sleep between workdays." Zara's heart swelled at his words. "I feel the same way. When I lost my parents, I thought I'd never find a home again, but being here with you, it feels right in a way nothing has for a very long time." "Then stay," York said, his voice low and intense. Stay and we'll face whatever Preston or anyone else throws at us together. Together, Zara agreed, the word feeling like a vow. York's hands gently framed her face as he leaned in to kiss her, a kiss deeper and more passionate than their first, filled with promise and growing emotion. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Zara Montgomery," he whispered, "and that terrifies me more than any threat Preston could make." "Why does it terrify you?" she asked, her fingers lightly tracing the line of his jaw. "Because I've spent years building walls around myself, focusing on the ranch, on success. Letting someone in caring this much, it makes me vulnerable in ways I haven't been since I lost my sister." "Love isn't weakness, York," Zara said softly. "It's strength. It's what gives life meaning beyond just survival." He smiled, a rare, unguarded smile that transformed his face. "When did you get so wise?" "I had good teachers," she replied, thinking of her mother's quiet strength, her father's passionate pursuit of what he believed in despite his flaws. "And recent experience has taught me that life is too precious and too uncertain to waste time hiding from what we truly want." York kissed her again, and Zara felt as though something long dormant within her was finally awakening hope, joy, possibility. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, and that knowledge made even Preston's threats seem less daunting. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm of work and growing closeness. Zara found her place at the ranch, not just as a guest, but as an active participant in its daily life. She helped Mrs. Flores with the household management, planted and expanded herb garden, and even learned to ride, accompanied by York on leisurely explorations of the ranch's vast acreage. Their evenings were filled with conversation, laughter, and increasingly tender moments of affection. York, initially reserved in showing his feelings, gradually became more demonstrative, occasionally catching Zara's hand as they walked or stealing a kiss when they found themselves momentarily alone. Through it all, the specter of Preston's threats hung over them, though no direct confrontation materialized. York maintained extra vigilance, assigning men to patrol the ranch boundaries and insisting that Zara never ride out alone. But as days passed without incident, they began to hope that perhaps Preston's anger had cooled, or that he had found other matters to occupy his attention. Then, one clear autumn morning, the peaceful routine of the ranch was shattered. Zara was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Flores preserve the last of the summer peaches when Diego burst through the door, his young face tight with alarm. "Fire," he gasped. "The north pasture is burning." York, who had been reviewing accounts at the table, was on his feet instantly. "Get the men, all of them, and the water wagons." As Diego ran to obey, York turned to Zara and Mrs. Flores. "Stay in the house. Keep buckets of water ready in case the wind shifts and brings the fire this way." "Be careful," Zara said, fear clutching at her heart as she saw the grim determination in his eyes. He nodded once, pausing only long enough to press a quick kiss to her forehead before striding out, already calling orders to the men gathering in the yard. From the kitchen window, Zara could see a column of dark smoke rising above the hills to the north. Fire was a rancher's nightmare, capable of destroying acres of grazing land in hours and threatening livestock, buildings, and lives. "Is it Preston?" she asked Mrs. Flores, who was efficiently filling buckets from the pump. The older woman's face was grave. "Perhaps. The north pasture is far from the road, and there has been no lightning." "Then it was set deliberately," Zara concluded, her stomach knotting with guilt and anger. For hours they watched and waited as the men battled the blaze. More smoke rose, then gradually lessened as the afternoon wore on. It was nearly dusk when the first riders returned, exhausted and soot-blackened. "The fire is contained," one of them reported when Zara and Mrs. Flores hurried out to meet them. "But we lost about 100 acres of good grazing land." "And the cattle?" Mrs. Flores asked. "Most got out in time." "We lost maybe a dozen head." "Where is York?" Zara asked, scanning the returning group anxiously. "Still out there with some of the men, making sure no embers reignite. He sent us back to rest and get fresh horses." It was full dark by the time York finally returned, looking utterly spent. His clothes and face were blackened with soot, his eyes reddened from smoke, his hands blistered from fighting the fire. Zara met him at the door, her relief at seeing him safe overwhelming her. "Thank God you're all right." He accepted her embrace briefly before gently disengaging. "I need to clean up. I'm filthy." "I'll prepare hot water," she said, recognizing his need for practical care rather than emotion at that moment. Later, after he had bathed and eaten, they sat together on the porch, the night air cool against their skin. York was unusually quiet, his gaze fixed on the distant darkness where, hours earlier, flames had threatened everything he had built. "It was Preston, wasn't it?" Zara finally asked. "Can't prove it," York replied, his voice rough with fatigue. "But yes, I'm certain it was his doing. Too well planned to be an accident." The fire started in 3 separate locations, designed to spread quickly with the morning breeze. "I'm so sorry, York." He turned to her, his expression softening. "This isn't your fault, Zara. If you hadn't come here, Preston and I would have found another reason to clash," York interrupted. "And I would never have known what I was missing." He took her hand, his thumb gently stroking her palm. "100 acres and a few cattle are a small price to pay for finding you." His words touched her deeply, but also intensified her concern. "What if next time it's worse? What if someone gets hurt?" "I've sent word to Sheriff Turner about the fire. Without proof, there's not much he can do officially, but at least he's aware." York's expression hardened. "And I've arranged for extra men to patrol the boundaries day and night. Preston won't catch us unprepared again." "Do you think he'll try something else?" "Probably," York admitted. "But we'll be ready." The following days were tense, everyone on the ranch alert for any sign of trouble. York spent long hours riding the boundaries with his men, checking for any evidence of trespassers. Zara rarely saw him during daylight hours, and when they were together in the evenings, he was often preoccupied, his mind on the ranch's security rather than their growing relationship. A week after the fire, Zara decided that waiting passively for Preston's next move was intolerable. While York was out on patrol, she asked Diego to hitch up the buggy. "Where are you going, señorita?" Mrs. Flores asked with concern when she saw Zara preparing to leave. "To town," Zara replied, pulling on her gloves. "There's something I need to do." "Señor York would not want you going alone," the housekeeper protested. "It is not safe." "Diego will accompany me," Zara assured her, "and we'll be back well before dark." Mrs. Flores clearly disapproved but recognized the determination in Zara's eyes. "Be careful, Nina. And do not tell Señor York I let you go without an argument." The journey to Willow Creek was uneventful, though Zara remained vigilant, aware of how vulnerable they were on the open road. Once in town, she directed Diego to wait with the buggy while she made her way to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Turner looked up in surprise when she entered. "Miss Montgomery, this is unexpected." "I need to speak with you about Bartholomew Preston," Zara said without preamble. The sheriff gestured to the chair across from his desk. "I figured as much. Black would know you're here." "No," Zara admitted, "but this couldn't wait." Turner sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I heard about the fire. Nasty business, but without witnesses or evidence. I understand you can't arrest him based on suspicion alone, Zara interrupted. But surely there must be something that can be done before someone gets seriously hurt. Law's got limitations, Miss Montgomery, especially when it comes to men with Preston's wealth and connections. Then forget the law for a moment, Zara pressed. As a man who knows this territory and its people, what can you tell me about Preston? What drives him? There must be some way to resolve this without further violence. Turner studied her thoughtfully before answering. Preston's always been driven by two things: pride and the need to control everything around him. The fact that Blackwood defied him publicly, then won in court, that's a humiliation he can't stomach. And there's no way to appeal to his better nature. The sheriff actually laughed at that. Preston doesn't have a better nature, Miss Montgomery, but he does have a weakness: his standing in society. His wife comes from old money back east, and she's got ambitions for him to enter territorial politics. How does that help us? A public scandal, something that exposed his involvement in illegal activities like that auction, would destroy those ambitions. Turner leaned forward. I couldn't prove he set that fire, but if he were caught in the act of something similar. You're suggesting we set a trap, Zara realized. I didn't say that, Turner replied carefully. That would be improper advice from an officer of the law. I'm merely pointing out that Preston is usually too smart to do his own dirty work directly, but if he were angry enough, provoked enough, he might make a mistake, Zara finished. An idea was forming in her mind, dangerous, perhaps, but potentially effective. Just be careful, Turner warned, clearly reading her expression. Preston's not a man to underestimate. Zara left the sheriff's office with renewed purpose. Her plan was risky, and York would likely oppose it vehemently, but she couldn't bear to watch him under siege on his own land, constantly vigilant, waiting for the next attack. She had one more stop to make before returning to the ranch. The Willow Creek Gazette was a small newspaper, but its editor, Jonathan Mills, had a reputation for independence and integrity. Miss Montgomery, Mills greeted her when she entered the newspaper office. What brings you to our humble establishment? I'd like to place an announcement in your paper, Mr. Mills, Zara replied, and I'm willing to pay extra for it to appear in tomorrow's edition. Mills raised an eyebrow curiously. What sort of announcement? An engagement notice, Zara said, her heart racing at her own boldness. Between myself and York Blackwood. The editor's eyes widened with interest. Now that is news. Blackwood's one of the most eligible bachelors in the territory. Half the unmarried women in the county will be devastated. Will you print it? Zara pressed. Of course. Though I must say, this is rather sudden. The last time your name appeared in my paper was in connection with that courthouse hearing barely a month ago. Sometimes certainty doesn't require a long acquaintance, Mr. Mills, Zara replied, hoping she sounded more confident than she felt. In truth, while she and York had acknowledged their growing feelings, they had not discussed marriage. But for her plan to work, Preston needed to believe that York had claimed not just his property, but had made her his wife to be the ultimate insult to his pride. As she dictated the wording of the announcement, Zara prayed that York would understand and forgive her presumption once she explained her reasoning. The ride back to the ranch was tense, with Zara rehearsing how she would explain her actions to York. But as they approached the final turn in the road leading to Blackwood Ranch, her explanations were forgotten at the sight that greeted them. Riders were galloping toward the main house from all directions, York's men, clearly responding to some emergency. And rising above the rooftops was another column of smoke, this one billowing directly from the ranch itself. Hurry, Diego, Zara cried, her heart pounding with terror. As they drove into the yard, chaos met them. The barn was ablaze, men forming a bucket brigade from the well to combat the flames. Horses whinnied in panic from the nearby corral where they had been safely moved. "Where is York?" Zara demanded, leaping from the buggy before it had fully stopped. "Inside the barn," one of the men shouted, pointing toward the burning structure. 2 horses were still trapped. He went in after them. Horror seized Zara as she stared at the flames engulfing the wooden building. The roof was already partially collapsed, and thick, black smoke poured from the doors and windows. "York!" she screamed, starting toward the barn, only to be held back by one of the ranch hands. "You can't go in there, Miss Montgomery. It's about to collapse completely." As if to punctuate his words, there was an ominous cracking sound, and another section of the roof caved in, sending a shower of sparks into the air. Zara's knees buckled, and she might have fallen if not for the supporting arm around her waist. Then, miraculously, a figure emerged from the smoke. York, leading 2 terrified horses. He made it just a few yards from the barn before collapsing to his knees, overcome by smoke and exertion. Zara broke free and ran to him, falling to the ground beside him as the horses were led away by the ranch hands. York was coughing violently, his face streaked with soot, his clothes singed in places. "You idiot," she sobbed, cradling his face in her hands. "You could have been killed." Between coughs, he managed a weak smile. "Couldn't. Let them burn. The horses would have understood," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I wouldn't have." His expression sobered as he finally caught his breath enough to speak clearly. "Where were you? Mrs. Flores said you went to town. Do you have any idea how worried I was when I returned and found you gone?" "I went to see Sheriff Turner," she admitted. "And then to the newspaper." "The newspaper?" York looked confused. "Why?" Before Zara could explain, Mrs. Flores hurried over with a canteen of water. "Drink, senor." Small sips. York obeyed, his eyes never leaving Zara's face. When he had drunk, Mrs. Flores helped him to his feet. "You need to rest to breathe clean air," the housekeeper insisted. "The men have the fire under control now." Indeed, the flames were subsiding as the bucket brigade continued its work. The barn was clearly a total loss, but the fire had been prevented from spreading to the other buildings. "Who did this?" Zara asked as they slowly made their way toward the house. "Preston." York spat the name. "One of my men spotted 2 riders leaving just as the fire started. He recognized one of them as Preston's foreman. Then we have proof this time. Witnessing someone fleeing the scene isn't the same as catching them in the act," York said bitterly. "It's still our word against theirs." Once inside, Mrs. Flores insisted on examining York for burns while Zara prepared a soothing tea with honey for his smoke-irritated throat. When they were finally alone in the sitting room, York fixed her with a penetrating look. "Now, explain to me what was so important that you risked going to town alone, knowing Preston's men could be watching the roads." Zara took a deep breath. "I went to Sheriff Turner to ask his advice about Preston. He suggested that if Preston could be provoked into taking direct action himself, rather than working through his men, he might be caught and held accountable." "Provoked how?" York asked suspiciously. "By something that would wound his pride so deeply he couldn't delegate his revenge," Zara explained. "Something like a public announcement of our engagement in the Willow Creek Gazette." York stared at her, temporarily speechless. "You announced our engagement without discussing it with me first?" "It was the only thing I could think of that would be guaranteed to infuriate him enough to act personally," Zara said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I know I should have talked to you first, but I couldn't stand watching you under constant threat because of me. I thought if we could force Preston to show his hand to make a mistake." She trailed off at York's expression. "You're angry." I'm not angry that you announced our engagement, he said slowly. I'm concerned that you put yourself at risk by going to town, and I'm worried that your plan might work too well. If Preston is pushed to his breaking point, there's no telling what he might do. But at least it would end this standoff, Zara argued. We can't live under constant threat forever. York's expression softened and he reached for her hand. No, we can't. And you're right, this needs to end. He paused, a hint of a smile touching his lips. Though I have to say, most men prefer to do their own proposing. Zara blushed deeply. I didn't mean to presume. The announcement was meant as a strategy, not a. That is, I don't expect you to feel obligated. He silenced her with a gentle finger to her lips. Zara Montgomery, from the moment I saw you on that auction block, something in me recognized you not just as someone who needed help, but as someone who belonged in my life. These past weeks have only confirmed what I think I knew from the start. What's that? She whispered. That I love you, he said simply. That I want to build a life with you, so while your method was unconventional, your timing impeccable, and your motives somewhat strategic. His smile widened. Yes, I'll marry you. Joy bubbled up within her, temporarily pushing aside the fear and tension of the day. You will, on one condition, he added, suddenly serious again. We deal with Preston first. I won't start our married life under the shadow of his threats. Agreed, Zara said firmly. The announcement will appear in tomorrow's paper. If Sheriff Turner is right about Preston's character, he won't be able to resist responding directly. Then we'd better be ready for him, York said, his expression hardening. Because the next time he comes for us, it will be the last. The following day dawned clear and cool, autumn firmly established in the crispness of the air. Repairs had already begun on the charred remains of the barn, the men working efficiently under York's direction despite their heightened vigilance. Zara was helping Mrs. Flores prepare lunch when Diego returned from town with supplies and the latest edition of the Gazette. He handed the newspaper to Zara with a knowing smile. It is there, señorita. Front page. Sure enough, prominently displayed was the announcement. Engagement announced Mr. York Blackwood and Miss Zara Montgomery are pleased to announce their engagement. The couple will be married at Blackwood Ranch on the first Saturday of next month. Mr. Blackwood, owner of one of the territory's largest cattle operations, and Miss Montgomery, formerly of Boston, Massachusetts, have known each other since Miss Montgomery's arrival in Arizona earlier this season. Friends describe their courtship as a whirlwind romance. The Gazette extends its congratulations to the happy couple. Zara felt a mix of emotions reading the notice: happiness at the truth of their engagement, anxiety about Preston's potential reaction, and guilt over the deception regarding the wedding date. There was no planned ceremony next month. That detail had been added to create urgency in Preston's mind. Let me see, Mrs. Flores requested, wiping her hands on her apron. She read the announcement with a broad smile. It is official then. I knew from the moment Senor York brought you home that you were meant for each other. You did? Zara asked, surprised by the housekeeper's certainty. Of course, I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Mrs. Flores patted Zara's hand. It is good. He has been alone too long. York returned to the house for lunch, reading the announcement with raised eyebrows. Mills didn't waste any time, did he? And apparently, we've had a whirlwind romance. Is that not true? Zara asked, half teasing despite the seriousness of their situation. His expression softened as he looked at her. I suppose it is. Though whirlwind doesn't quite capture nearly being shot by Preston's men, fighting a range fire and rescuing horses from a burning barn. Just an average courtship in the Arizona territory, I'm sure, Zara replied with a nervous laugh. York's expression grew serious again. "Diego, take this paper to Sheriff Turner. Tell him to expect trouble within the next day or two. We believe Preston will make his move soon." As Diego departed on his mission, York turned to Zara and Mrs. Flores. "I want both of you to stay inside the house for the next few days. All the windows and doors are to remain locked. If you hear anything unusual, gunshots, shouting, anything, go to the root cellar immediately. There are provisions there, and it's the safest place if—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. They all understood the implied danger. That night, York positioned his men strategically around the ranch with extra guards watching the approach roads. He himself remained on the porch, rifle across his lap, alert for any sign of trouble. Zara brought him coffee as the hours stretched on, sitting beside him in the darkness for companionable stretches before Mrs. Flores insisted she try to get some rest. "You should sleep too," Zara told him as midnight approached. "You can't stay awake indefinitely." "I'll rest when this is over," York replied, his eyes scanning the moonlit landscape before them. "When I know you're safe." She touched his face gently, feeling the stubble on his jaw. "We will be safe, together." He turned to kiss her palm, his eyes never leaving the darkness beyond the porch. "Together," he agreed. "Now go inside, please. I'll feel better knowing you're secure." Reluctantly, Zara obeyed, though sleep eluded her as she lay in bed, straining to hear any unusual sounds from outside. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she drifted into an uneasy slumber. She woke with a start in the pre-dawn darkness, unsure what had disturbed her sleep. Then she heard the soft creak of a floorboard in the hallway outside her room. Someone was in the house. Heart pounding, Zara slipped from her bed and reached for the small derringer York had insisted she keep in her bedside drawer. The weapon felt foreign and frightening in her hand, but she gripped it firmly as she moved silently to the door. Another creak, closer now. Whoever was out there was approaching her room. Zara positioned herself to the side of the door, the small pistol raised, her breath held as the doorknob slowly turned. The door swung open, and a tall figure entered, not York's familiar silhouette, but a stranger, moving with deliberate stealth. In the dim light filtering through the curtains, Zara could make out the unmistakable form of a gun in his hand. Without conscious thought, she stepped forward, pressing her derringer against the intruder's back. "Don't move," she commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. The man froze. "Well, well," he said softly. "The little lady's got some spine after all." Zara recognized the voice with a chill. Bartholomew Preston himself. "How did you get past the guards?" she demanded, keeping the gun firmly pressed against him. "Money opens many doors, Miss Montgomery. Or should I say, the future Mrs. Blackwood." The mockery in his tone was unmistakable. "I paid one of York's newer hands quite handsomely to leave a section of the boundary unguarded." "What do you want?" Zara asked, though she already knew the answer. "To settle accounts," Preston replied coldly. "Blackwood has taken too much from me, my dignity, my standing in the community. When I saw that announcement in the paper, I realized that words and warnings weren't enough. Some lessons need to be taught more directly. By sneaking into a woman's bedroom in the middle of the night." Zara challenged, her fear giving way to anger. "Is that how the esteemed Bartholomew Preston demonstrates his courage?" He turned slightly, and Zara pressed the gun harder against him. "Don't move. You won't shoot me," Preston said with contempt. "You don't have it in you." "Perhaps not," Zara conceded. "But I will certainly scream, and York will be here in seconds." "Do you think he'll hesitate to pull the trigger?" Preston tensed, clearly reassessing his position. "This changes nothing. Blackwood still needs to be taught a lesson." "The only lesson being taught tonight is that you're a coward," Zara said, her voice gaining strength. Breaking into a house to threaten a woman, is that how you prove your manhood, Mr. Preston? A new voice spoke from the doorway. She's right, Preston. Only a coward fights his battles this way. York stood framed in the doorway, his pistol aimed steadily at Preston's chest. His expression was calm, but his eyes burned with a cold fury that made Zara shiver despite her relief at his arrival. "How long have you been there?" Preston demanded. "Long enough," York replied. "I suspected you might try something after the engagement announcement. I just didn't expect you to be quite so predictable or so foolish." Preston's hand tightened on his gun. "I can still kill her before you shoot me, Blackwood." "You could try," York agreed. "But you'd be dead before you turned around fully. And from the way Zara is holding that Derringer, I think she might just put a bullet in you herself if you move." For a tense moment, no one spoke. Then from downstairs came the sound of the front door opening and heavy footsteps entering the house. "Blackwood, it's Sheriff Turner. Your man found me on the road, said there might be trouble." "Up here, Sheriff," York called, never taking his eyes off Preston. "I believe you'll find Mr. Preston has some explaining to do about breaking and entering, not to mention attempted murder." Preston's shoulders slumped as he heard the sheriff climbing the stairs. His moment of reckoning had arrived, and even he could see there was no escape. "Drop the gun, Preston," Sheriff Turner ordered as he appeared behind York, his own weapon drawn. "It's over." With a look of pure hatred directed at York and Zara, Preston let his pistol fall to the floor with a thud. As the sheriff moved forward to secure him, York crossed quickly to Zara's side, gently taking the Derringer from her trembling hand. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his free arm encircling her protectively. "I am now," she answered, the reality of what had just happened beginning to sink in. "He said he bribed one of your men." "Jake Miller," York nodded grimly. "He's been with us less than a month. We found him tied up in the bunkhouse apparently. He had second thoughts after taking Preston's money and tried to warn us. Preston's men overpowered him." "You planned for this," Zara realized. "You knew Preston would come himself." "I hoped he would," York admitted. "It was the only way to end this for good. Your idea about the engagement announcement was inspired. It was exactly the provocation he couldn't resist." As Sheriff Turner led a sullen Preston from the room, the rancher turned back for one final threat. "This isn't over, Blackwood. I have friends in high places." "Actually, it is over," the sheriff countered. "Breaking into a man's home with a loaded weapon, threatening a woman that'll get you a nice long stay in the territorial prison, Preston. I don't care how many friends you have." When they were alone again, York pulled Zara into a tight embrace. "When I realized he was in the house, heading for your room, I've never been so frightened in my life." "I was scared too," Zara admitted, her face pressed against his chest, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "But also angry, that he thought he had the right to threaten us, to destroy what we're building together." York drew back slightly to look into her eyes. "You were magnificent, Zara Montgomery, holding him at gunpoint, challenging him. I don't think Preston knew what hit him." "I surprised myself," she acknowledged with a small smile. "I've never thought of myself as particularly brave." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," York said softly. "It's acting despite it." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch infinitely tender. "And you, my love, are the bravest person I know." Dawn was breaking as they made their way downstairs, where Mrs. Flores was brewing coffee and cooking breakfast for the sheriff's men, who had arrived to take Preston into custody. The housekeeper enveloped Zara in a fierce hug when she entered the kitchen. "Gracias a Dios, you are safe," when I heard the commotion. "We're all safe now," York assured her, "and Preston won't be troubling us again." Sheriff Turner joined them, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Flores with a grateful nod. Preston's on his way to the jail in Willow Creek. His men scattered when my deputies arrived, cowards, the lot of them. What happens now? Zara asked. He'll be charged with breaking and entering, attempted assault, and likely a few other things once I've had time to think about it, Turner replied with satisfaction. Even with his connections, he's looking at several years in prison. And his wife? York asked. She's innocent in all this. I sent a deputy to inform her of the situation, Turner said. From what I hear, she's been unhappy with Preston's behavior for some time. Wouldn't surprise me if she takes this opportunity to return east to her family. As the morning progressed, the ranch gradually returned to its normal routine. The sheriff and his men departed with promises to keep them informed of Preston's case. The ranch hands, relieved that the threat had finally been neutralized, went about their daily tasks with renewed energy. By afternoon, Zara found herself alone with York on the porch, watching the activity in the yard with a sense of peace that had been absent for weeks. "It's really over, isn't it?" she said, leaning against the porch railing beside him. "It is," he confirmed. Preston made a fatal mistake by coming himself. No more hiding behind hired men or claiming innocence. He showed his true colors, and now he'll pay the price. "And we can move forward," Zara said, turning to face him, "with our lives, together." York's expression grew serious as he took her hands in his. About that engagement announcement, Zara felt a moment of uncertainty. "I know it was presumptuous of me." "No," he interrupted gently. "It was perfect, but I think we should do this properly." To her surprise, he lowered himself to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "Zara Montgomery, will you marry me? Not for a newspaper announcement or to provoke a reaction from Preston, but because I love you more than I ever thought possible, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Joy welled up within her, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, York Blackwood, I will marry you." He rose and pulled her into his arms, sealing their promise with a kiss that spoke of all they had endured together and all they hoped to build in the future. When they finally parted, York smiled down at her. "You know, that announcement mentioned a wedding next month. Seems a shame to disappoint the good people of Willow Creek with a false date." "Are you suggesting we actually get married next month?" Zara asked, surprised by his eagerness. "Why wait?" he replied. "Unless you need more time." Zara considered this. A month ago, such haste would have seemed reckless. But after all they had faced together, the auction, the court hearing, Preston's threats and attacks, she felt as though she had known York for a lifetime. "No," she decided. "I don't need more time. Next month is perfect." They spent the remainder of the afternoon making plans for the wedding, for improvements to the ranch house, for their future together. As the sun began to set, painting the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold, York drew Zara close on the porch swing. "I never expected this," he confessed quietly. "When I rode into town that day and saw you on that auction block, I was only thinking of preventing an injustice. I had no idea I was finding the other half of my soul. And I never imagined that the darkest moment of my life would lead to such happiness," Zara replied, resting her head against his shoulder. "It's as though everything I lost, my parents, my home, my sense of security, was preparing me to find something even more precious. We'll build a good life here," York promised. "The ranch is thriving, and with you by my side it will truly be a home." "It already is," Zara said softly. "Home isn't just a place, it's where you belong. And I belong with you, York Blackwood. From the moment you said those words on the auction block, 'She belongs with me,' I think, somehow, I knew it too." The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a whirl of activity. News of Preston's arrest and the circumstances surrounding it had spread throughout the territory. turning what might have been a simple ranch wedding into something of a social event. Letters of congratulation arrived daily, along with offers of assistance from neighbors who had long respected York, but had been hesitant to befriend him due to his reserved nature. Mrs. Flores took charge of the wedding preparations with enthusiasm, coordinating with the women from neighboring ranches who volunteered to help with the cooking and decorations. Zara found herself swept up in decisions about flowers, food, and music, while also continuing to learn the intricacies of ranch management under York's patient guidance. The rebuilding of the barn became a community project, with ranchers from miles around arriving with lumber, tools, and willing hands. What might have taken York's men weeks to complete alone was finished in days, the new structure larger and sturdier than the one Preston's men had destroyed. Through it all, Zara and York's relationship deepened, each day bringing new discoveries about each other, new reasons to be certain of their decision. Their evenings together were precious times of connection, whether discussing the day's events, reading aloud to each other from York's extensive library, or simply sitting in companionable silence, watching the sunset from their favorite spot on the porch. 2 weeks before the wedding, a letter arrived from Boston that left Zara momentarily speechless. "What is it?" York asked, concerned by her expression as she read. "It's from my father's former business partner, Mr. Harrington," she explained, her voice unsteady. "Apparently, there was an insurance policy I knew nothing about. My father had taken it out years ago and never mentioned it, with his death, and now that I've been located." She looked up at York, her eyes wide. "There's a substantial sum enough to clear all my father's debts and leave a considerable remainder." York's face broke into a smile. "Zara, that's wonderful news. It changes things," she said hesitantly. "I'm not penniless anymore. I have options I didn't have before." A shadow crossed York's face. "Are you having second thoughts about marrying me?" "No," Zara exclaimed, reaching for his hand. "Never that. But it does mean I come to our marriage with something of my own. I won't be dependent on your generosity." Understanding dawned in York's eyes. "You were never that, Zara. From the moment you held Preston at gunpoint in your bedroom, I think we both knew you were nobody's dependent." She laughed, relieved by his perspective. "Still, it feels good to know I'm bringing something tangible to our partnership, beyond just myself." "You bring everything I need just by being you," York said simply. "But if this inheritance makes you feel more secure, then I'm glad of it." Zara made a decision then. "I want to use part of it to establish a fund for women who find themselves in situations like mine. To help them get home or start fresh, or whatever they need to be safe and independent." York's expression softened with pride. "That's a wonderful idea. We can work with Ben how to set it up legally." "We," Zara repeated, loving the sound of that simple word and all it implied about their future. The day of the wedding dawned clear and crisp, the November air carrying just a hint of the winter to come. Blackwood Ranch was transformed, with lanterns strung between the trees, tables set up on the wide lawn, and flowers adorning every available surface. In the guest bedroom that had become hers since her arrival, Zara sat before the mirror as Mrs. Flores arranged her hair, weaving fresh wildflowers among the golden strands. "You are beautiful, Nina," the housekeeper said, meeting Zara's eyes in the reflection. "Senor York will not be able to breathe when he sees you." Zara smiled, touching the simple white dress that Mrs. Flores and the neighboring women had worked on together. It wasn't the elaborate gown she might have worn for a Boston society wedding, but it was perfect for this day in this place, with the man who had saved her in more ways than one. "Are you nervous, Mrs. Flores asked as she adjusted the final flower. "No," Zara replied, realizing it was true. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." A knock at the door announced the arrival of Benjamin Howe, who had agreed to escort Zara in the absence of any family. "Ready, Miss Montgomery?" he asked with a warm smile. "There's quite a gathering downstairs. Half the territory seems to have turned out for this wedding." Zara took a deep breath, smoothing her dress one last time. "I'm ready." The ceremony was to take place in the front yard, where an arch of autumn flowers had been erected. As Zara descended the stairs on Ben's arm, she could hear the murmur of many voices from outside, punctuated by occasional laughter. They paused at the front door, and Mrs. Flores, who had hurried ahead, signaled to the small group of musicians. The opening notes of a traditional wedding march floated through the air as Ben led Zara outside and down the path that had been created between rows of chairs filled with guests. And there, waiting beneath the flower arch, was York. He wore a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. But it was his expression as he saw her that Zara would remember forever, a look of such pure joy and love that it took her breath away. The ceremony itself was simple and heartfelt. The minister, a circuit rider who served the scattered communities of the territory, spoke of commitment, partnership, and the sacred bond of marriage. York and Zara exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises that acknowledged the unusual beginning of their relationship and the strength they had found in each other through adversity. "I take you, Zara, as my wife," York said, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to protect you, not because you need protection, but because you are precious to me. I promise to respect your courage, your intelligence, and your independence. And I promise to love you every day for the rest of our lives, grateful that of all the paths we might have taken, ours led us to each other." Zara blinked back tears as she responded, "I take you, York, as my husband. I promise to stand beside you in all challenges, to be your partner in all endeavors, and to create with you a home filled with love and laughter. From the moment you said I belonged with you, I knew it was true. My heart recognized its other half, and I promise to honor that connection every day of our lives together." As they exchanged rings, simple gold bands that represented their commitment, Zara felt a sense of rightness, of completion. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and York kissed her with gentle passion before the assembled guests, she knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was meant to be. The celebration that followed was joyous and relaxed, with abundant food, music, and dancing that continued well into the evening. Sheriff Turner proposed a toast to the couple who had brought down the territory's most arrogant rancher, causing roars of laughter and applause. Ben Howe offered more solemn congratulations, speaking of the admiration he had for both bride and groom and his certainty that their union would bring them lasting happiness. As twilight deepened into night, lanterns were lit around the property, casting a warm glow over the festivities. York led Zara in a dance, holding her close as they moved to the music. "Happy Mrs. Blackwood," he murmured in her ear. "Completely," she replied, savoring the sound of her new name. "And you, more than I ever thought possible." He glanced around at their guests, at the ranch that had been transformed for this day of celebration. "When I built this place, I thought success meant having the biggest herd, the most land. Now I know better." "What does success mean now?" Zara asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "This," York said simply. "Having someone to share it all with, having a purpose beyond just accumulating more, building a life that matters together." As the evening drew to a close, and the last guests departed with final congratulations, York and Zara stood on the porch of what was now truly their home. The ranch was quiet once more, the lights gradually being extinguished as the workers retired to the bunkhouse and Mrs. Flores to her quarters. "What are you thinking?" York asked, his arm around Zara's waist as they gazed at the star-filled sky. "I'm thinking about that day in Willow Creek," she replied. "How terrified I was standing on that auction block, how certain I was that my life was over." She turned to face him, reaching up to touch his cheek. "And then you appeared like something from a dream, saying those words that changed everything. 'She belongs with me,'" York quoted softly. "Yes," Zara smiled, her heart full. "And now, finally, I truly do." York's answering smile was tender as he swept her into his arms, carrying her across the threshold of their home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood, for now and always." "For now and always," Zara agreed, knowing that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, two souls who had found each other against all odds, in the vast, wild territory they now called home.